Lately I've been doing a lot of radio interviews on this topic and on this book, obviously, and the hosts often start by asking me, why are so many kids leaving the faith? There are a lot of books out there that are addressing that issue, and I'm glad they are. I think it's an important question. But my issue has been more, someone else needs to deal with that. I'm going to talk to the parents on what do we do now? Because those parents aren't interested in the why. That's yesterday's question. Today they need to know, what do we do now? And so they don't even care if it's 99% of the kids who stay in the faith and 1% leave. Who cares? They're in the 1%. They need to know what it is that we do now. But I think there are some issues that are worth putting on the table, and the ones that are most frequently talked about is, we need to be teaching Genesis as a historical record. Some are saying we need to do a multi-generational church structure approach. Apologetics training, obviously that's one that I get on board with pretty soundly. I want our kids to be soundly prepared to run into people like me. Now, when I was in college many years ago, I was an anomaly. I was not the rule. Typical Christian kids did not run into very many people like me. But today, I'm really common. They're going to run into lots and lots of kids like I was. Now, what I don't want us to do is to buy into anything that replaces having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Because the pendulum can swing. We can find a new formula. Well, the formula is they just need to know apologetics. They do, but don't let that become the substitute for their personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That has to be center, or all of these things will be fruitless in the end. Every generation has had some problems with kids leaving the church. However, they typically return when they're married. That's always been the situation in the past. But the Barna studies are the ones that have really shaken things up, saying they're getting married and having kids and they're not coming back. And that's changed, and we're trying to figure out what's going on here. Why aren't they coming back? So I think these are all things we need to look at. There are other books out there that have other issues, but there's one that I keep coming back to, and because it keeps rolling around in my head, I'm going to go ahead and share it at the risk of sounding like my mother. I'm so frightened that this is happening. But here it goes. 50 years ago, if you had asked a young married couple, don't you want your children to know about Jesus? Don't you want them to be saved? 50 years ago, they would have said, yes. I mean, they might have kind of messed around with their life when it was just them, but when their kids come along, that's too important. They come back to church. But today, if you say to young parents of young children, particularly in this culture where, whatever works, if it works for you, it's fine, all truth is relative, that kind of thing. If you say to those parents, do you want your children to be saved? I think for an awful lot of parents today, the answer is, saved from what? I think we have lost something. And I say, whatever happened to sin? See, here I am, sounding like my mother. But let me explain to you why I fully understand why sin fell out of favor in the church in the first place, because I think that's important. Now, I don't mean outside the church. Sin has never been popular outside the church. I'm talking about inside the church. This is not a popular topic in our churches so much anymore. And so I'm going to go back to my childhood. I was in one of those denominations that loved to have the camp meetings in the hottest part of July and August. I have no idea why we picked that. We could have done it in the fall, but no, we did it in the summer. And we would go to these campgrounds, and we had these tin, like Quonset hut things that got to be 40 degrees inside? So, and we would sit there on those wooden chairs, those little fold-down wooden seats, and they would leave the most awful marks on your legs. I used to joke for years, I'm pretty sure that's what was meant when it said God would leave his mark on you, because you got up, man, those things were awful. So then they would bring in this evangelist. And man, he was all about sin. It was sin in our lives and sin in our homes and sin in our schools and sin in our minds, and sin leaves its ugly stain on us, sin, sin, sin. If you didn't know you were a sinner before, by gummy, you knew it by the time he was done. And there was that rise and fall of his vocal pitch, and then there was the music, Now, I was a music major for a while. I know full and well, when you go up a half step, up a half key, it takes the emotions of the room with you. There is something about that moves. So here we are, we're moving people on this kind of guilt thing, and he's got this sin going, and you felt the fires of hell licking at your feet. Even if you were saved, you felt them, And that was one of the problems with this approach. The first problem was it led you to believe the only place you could find God was in an altar call. And then the whole rest of the week, when you were at home, you were at risk because there wasn't an altar in your house. Okay, hopefully not. I mean, that could be frightening. Oh, what was it? They were saying, was it Nyquist was saying, people come in there saying, where's the family altar that they want to get? And they're reading Leviticus, which is just frightening. You don't want to go there. So, okay. Anyway, there are a lot of problems with that approach. One being that it could make you also feel guilty if you were already Christian. But here was the biggest problem in this method was the total lack of grace. The emphasis on sin without grace invariably leads to legalism. and then to self-righteous legalism, and then to pride. And we think we got it all covered. So after several decades, the tide turned. People stepped away from that hellfire and brimstone. I mean, it became a caricature. The hellfire and brimstone preacher. It became a caricature. And now pastors regularly preach of God's forgiveness and his patience and his instruction, his heart, his wishes for our good. Sermons today showcase God's abundance of grace, grace that we had missed in that previous generation. But if the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction, an imbalance, no matter how lovely, is still an imbalance. And what are the repercussions? I think we're only just starting to see the repercussions. It could be that a lot of young people today are not coming back to faith because they have no sense of just how far even their very best goodness is from the goodness that is God. I think we might have lost that. Now, in an equally telling comparison, parents 100 years ago would say, if you say to them, what do you want your child to grow up to be? They would say, I want him to grow up to be good. If you say to parents today, what do you want for your child? They say, I want him to grow up to be happy. Very, very different dynamic. Now, if this is all there is, if there's no God in heaven and this is the only shot we get, if we are all the captain of our ship, you know what, then being happy is a pretty reasonable objective. Makes sense. This is all you got. You might as well shoot for that. There is no need for additional moral or spiritual attainment if happy is the goal. So what's missing in this, I think the answer just might be sin. And I humbly suggest that perhaps sin and hell needs to re-enter the church lexicon. Please know I do not want to return to the days of my childhood. Because if it's all law, it's this ugly tasting medicine, and today's families will spit it out. But if it's all grace, it's this saccharine, sugary, sweet thing that has no nutrition. And the only way that people are going to get the truth is when those two things are brought to the table in the way that God himself brought them to the table.